Welcome to NCBA's Cattleman's Call podcast with host Lane Nordland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cattleman's Call podcast. Lane Nordland, happy to be with you here today. And as we look at today's topic, we're going to be talking about conservation easements, the pros, the cons, what they are, and are they right for you? And I'm excited to discuss this because this can be one of those topics that can go well at an agricultural meeting, or it might get a little controversial. So I'm excited to be joined today with some of our guests that are well known in the livestock community. Joining us here today, Michael Delbar with California Rangeland Trust joins us, and Mr. Chad Ellis, CEO of the Texas Ag Land Trust. Gentlemen, how are things going as we tape this program during CattleCon 24?
It's going great, Lane. Good to see you. It's been a little while, and it's just busy. Yeah. But CattleCon, it's about seeing family, right? I mean, that's the thing. We're all family members, and being able to, it's kind of a big reunion and having a blast.
Yeah. Michael?
I would just echo that. It's nice to be here and amongst all of our family, our friends. It's nice that at home we're getting some rain in California and some little warmer weather, so it's doubly nice to be able to say that things are looking good at home.
Yeah. Have you rode the teacups yet over at Disney World? I heard that was your favorite.
That
ride.
is my favorite, yes.
Yeah. It's a Small World. It's probably Michael's.
I love that. I just can't get enough of that song.
Is there a better, what's better, Disneyland or Disney World for that ride?
Oh, that's a tough question. You told us this was going to be an easy podcast.
But, gentlemen, thanks for humoring me here just a little bit. But first off, I want to learn more about your backgrounds and how you got into the positions you are today. But before we do that, let's just talk a little more about your organizations that you represent. Michael, I'll let you go first.
So the California Rangeland Trust was started just over 25 years ago, 26 actually, this month, by the California Cattlemen's Association on the premise that there was some money available to do conservation easements, but really no organization that really understood the ranching business. And as you probably know, conservation easements are perpetual. It's a forever contract. So a landowner that's going to enter into one of those should probably know that organization that's going to be their partner is one that understands what they do and why they do it. So Cattlemen's Association thought, we'll start our own and see what happens. So fast forward 26 years, we're the largest California land trust with 390,000 acres under easement and another 230,000 acres in the pipeline.
Wow. 89
ranching families that have their ranches permanently protected through us, and about 95 families in that pipeline. So it's been a very, very successful venture for the livestock industry in California.
Well, thanks for that overview, and looking forward to diving into this topic more. And Chad, for yourself, let's talk more about your role in the organization.
We're at Texas Ag Land Trust, we're not quite as as old as California Rangeland Trust, but we're right behind them. We're starting our 17th year. One of the key things was we were built by producers for producers. So we're tied like Michael to the Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, Texas Farm Bureau, and Texas Wildlife Association. So those are the three major grassroots landowner organizations in Texas. And I think they saw the foresight, 17, 18 years ago of hey, we need a potential tool. Again, it's not the right tool for every family, and timing and situations are everyone. But if we want to have that tool and that opportunity, we need a trusted source that looks at these issues through a producer's lens and understands that.
Well, again, thanks for that overview of both your organizations. And I really picked up, though, on, of course, producer started. I think that's important as we think about these two and maybe how we differentiate some other easements and whatnot in our discussion today. But let's talk about your backgrounds a little bit, too. Chad, I think the first time I met you was at the GLC.
Don't tell all these stories.
Grazing Lands Coalition meeting there. I'm the Montana GLCI. We still call it GLCI up there, I guess. But let's just talk about your career and the path that led you there to the Land Trust.
Lane, we've known each other a long time, and connected through the Grazing Land Coalition, and I'm past chairman and still part of the board, and they can't get rid of me. It's kind of another
you
family.
And Bob Lee.
Yeah, me and Bob Lee, exactly. I grew up in a small farm and ranching community, kind of right in the dead center of Texas. So when you really look at me, I mean, we had 85 students, K through 12. I graduated the class of 4, right? I mean, my DNA and my threads of me is producers and those land stewards. And so, when we come, fast forward, I've, had a career of, working for NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, kind of throughout Texas, and I was here in Florida actually for about 4 years as a state range conservationist, and
That's quite the difference.
it is quite a difference. Yeah. I went from far west Texas, a 9-inch rainfall, to Florida, 60-inch rainfall in a July one. Moved one summer. So
Armadillos for gators.
So, it's, I've had that career with NRCS. I moved on with NRCS and worked for Noble Foundation, Noble Research Institute for, 10 or so years, and had a blast, right? I mean, another organization, a nonprofit that's really thinking about finding solutions for producers. And you fast forward today, I've been here at Texas Ag Land Trust for 4 years. And at time flies, really, but 25 plus years of trying to help my fellow producers.
Yep. Well, thanks for that background. And Michael, he gave a pretty good background story there, but let's learn more about your background as well.
I can compete with that one. I grew up in an agricultural community and in agriculture and more the fresh fruit side of things, and went to school, agriculture major, ag business major, went to work for USDA and in the inspection service, working throughout California. In doing so, I met my wife and got into the cattle business that way, married into it, and our kids are 6th generation on some of the same property that was homesteaded in 1859.
Wow.
So some very deep roots. Did some time in local government, elected official, did 12 years doing that. Prior to that, I had worked as an executive director for one of our county farm bureaus, and in doing so, we had an issue come up, a land use issue come up, where a school wanted to expand into an area next to a vineyard, which would have really negatively impacted that vineyard. We argued against the land use decision that the Board of Supervisors made at the time, but somebody stood up and said they ought to be forced to do a conservation easement. And a lot of us went, what is that? What's that mean? So we thought, well, if they're going to do that, to go down that road, then we, the ag community, ought to put together a land trust. So we started to do that. I took my frustration with the board to the next level and ran and won. So at the same time, the California Rangeland Trust was being formed. So we just punted to the Rangeland Trust to be that entity. So I did my 12 years in local government, got off of that, took a year off to regain my sanity, and then had the opportunity to take over the COO role with the Rangeland Trust about 14 years ago, and took over the CEO role in spring of 20, right at COVID. So it's been a great honor. It's I'm really appreciative of what the organization does and the folks that we work with. Our board, as I know Chad's as well, are just salt of the earth folks. They've got to be ranchers to be on our board.
Yep.
And that's that key that builds that trust with the ranching community. They know that their brothers and sisters are the ones that are governing those easements. So it's been an honor to be part of that organization.
Well, again, thank you both for your backgrounds. I think that's just so important for our listeners and viewers to know that you guys have a vested interest in agriculture too, because as I mentioned at the beginning, when folks hear the term conservation easement, there's mixed emotions about them. So from your entity's perspective, can you walk us through what is a conservation easement? Kind of in more depth, and maybe share a few other examples of other conservation easements that are out there that are offered through other groups or through the government, and just educate me too, because it's something that I'm curious as a young producer that would like to maybe get some more land or whatever. I don't know a lot about it, and I know a lot of our audience doesn't either. And I can personally say I am scared about stuff like that. I don't know the steps a person should take.
Well, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the key. So you want to start us off, and I'll.
Sure. I think the best way to look at it is it's a contract. And it's a conservation contract between the landowner and the conservation organization like TALT or CRT. And they're forever. So the landowner should not take this lightly. It should be something that they talk amongst their family, their attorneys, their accountants, everybody. Make sure everybody understands what that decision is going to mean. And because it's not just for today, it's forever. It's for the next 25, 50, 100 years. So that agreement, that contract, is one where the development rights are transferred through either a sale, in which case the landowner is paid for those development rights, or through a donation, where there's tax benefits associated with that, or a combination of the two, a bargain sale. Get a little bit of cash, get a little bit of tax credit. And that's the value of that development is given to that landowner without actually doing the development. They still own the property. And that's a key point to remember is government doesn't own the property. The landowner continues to own the property. They continue to live on it if they are now, manage it, ride on it, ranch it, they don't lose the opportunity to pay taxes on it. They still get to keep that. It is everything that they're doing now. They just can't subdivide it. They can't put that strip mall on there. It remains the way it is today.
Yeah, and I think, Michael, and I think this is important. When we think about Michael's organization and TALT's, and we have some other key partners that are part of a kind of a bigger group. Our partnership of Rangeland Trust and other same ag focused working lands focused that are tied to those state coalitions. Our state cattlemen associations, and one of the key pieces, right, is just understanding those things and understanding that we're there, we work with them, and more importantly is kind of have it's kind of a thinking process, right? And it's kind of like I said, you don't know what you don't know, and that's where we sit around the table and say, hey, here's the pros and cons. Understanding goals and objectives of that family and that family operation is very important. It's kind of that first step.
Oftentimes we hear, well, we have to negotiate this easement with you. And our response is no.
There's no negotiation.
There's no negotiations. Yeah. It is your easement as a landowner.
Yeah.
We're your partner in it. Yeah. The negotiations, if there is such, it occurs between the funder and us being that partnership. Mm-hmm. So there's no, if it doesn't work for the landowner, it doesn't work for us. And that's a key point. And that kind of differentiates organizations like ours from some of the other conservation organizations out there.
And I think because we're grounded around guiding principles, and some of those guiding principles, Lane, is, we want to keep working lands working. We're not going to dictate management, right? You're going to be able to run your place. Stewardship requires stewards. And our fellow ranchers across the country know how to run their place. And that's not our place. Our place is trying to help keep that heritage and legacy together, and again, and through that partnership.
It seems that most of the time when we hear conservation easements up in my country, I'm from Montana, Michael. I don't know if I said that, but it's in the more urban areas. You look at Bozeman, Montana, home of Montana State University, or land-grant university, some of the best topsoil in the state. It's being developed. There's a local land trust there that truly keeps the agriculture community in business. But when you're out in the middle of the prairie there in eastern Montana, some people may say, we don't need one out here. But then you think of just the land that is getting developed and whatnot. So how much rangeland is taken out of production every year? Do you gentlemen have that information, or at least in your
I'll kind of talk about it from Texas. We're competitive, damn competitive, Lane, right, as Texans, and we're winning this race of development and fragmentation. We're losing close to 1,000 acres a day, right? So let's put that in perspective. Over 360,000 acres in a year. And so when we think about fragmentation, I mean, it's real and it's happening, and we're seeing these pressures. I think this also the nexus, that we face in Texas is not only that pressure, but there's 1,400 new people moving daily to the state. So 500,000 people added. And so different thoughts, different mindsets, more pressures to the land. It's scary when you really start sitting back and thinking about it.
One recent study showed that there's 18 million acres that are of farm and ranch land that will be lost by 2040. That's the size of South Carolina. That's a lot of land to lose. And if we're going to continue to produce food and fiber and have that food security, we can't. We have to do a better job.
So from your perspective, how can conservation easements work to keep these lands in livestock production is really what we're talking about here today. But how do you work to keep those in there? I guess ultimately, I know that's the goal of your organizations, but how do you work to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting out there and partnering with those landowners and kind of giving them options, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is provide options for the families to keep it together. As Michael said, we have sort of the purchased easements and donated easements, and maybe back up just a little bit, Lane. To me, that's important when we think about easements and kind of your question as a whole. What I love about the conservation easement is it's not a cookie cutter, right? It's not. It can be fine tuned to meet each family and every need, and each one of our conservation easements, and I know yours probably are too, Michael, is each of them look different. There's not one conservation easement we've done a family that looks just mirrored just like another. And so that's, I think, the piece of what you're saying of like, how do we work with those? It's understanding and sitting around the table. What are those goals and objectives, and fine tuning that tool to help them.
And one of the pressures and one of the reasons a lot of conservation easements are done is in families as they grow, and mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, they started the ranch or even before that. And now we're down to some family members that don't want to participate in the day-to-day activities on the ranch. They know there's value there, but they want their share of the value, but not their share of the work. And so those who want to stay on that ranch and keep it a viable operation are trying to find a way, how do I pay off my cousin, my brother or sister, whoever it may be, and an easement gives a tool for that, where they can take those proceeds and give that value, share that value to that partner, that family member, and then remain on the ranch. And that's as Chad said, that's our goal too, is to keep ranchers ranching.
Yeah, and we see that. I think some other examples too, Michael, is that we've worked with is, it's we're land rich, cash poor, right? And it's a one way to get a little liquidity out of that and being able to either retire. We see a lot of families too that will take that purchased. Maybe they don't need to buy out a sibling or someone else in the family, but there's only just like every ranching operation, usually it will only support one family. So one of them may be, run and operate, but what they'll do, right, is develop a kind of a operational endowment and put that money in there, right? So when that water well goes out and you have to call your sister and a brother that hasn't been out to the ranch and say, hey, I need $20,000 so we can get this done. There's that operational, and it kind of helps with those tug of wars that happen, and that we see a lot of break down a lot of families in these operations.
Well, we're going to continue to talk about this and expand upon this conversation here, but we do need to take a quick pause and hear these messages here today.
When it comes to the beef business, there's no room for gray area. The decisions being made in Washington affect the future of the beef industry, the livelihood of your fellow farmers and ranchers. Your National Cattlemen's Beef Association knows there's what benefits cattlemen and there's what doesn't. Visit ncba.org to learn more.
As we come back with our guests here today, Michael Delbar with California Rangeland Trust and Chad Ellis with Texas Eggland Trust. I am very curious about this, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation here today, just because there's a lot of unknowns for some people when they haven't been exposed to these. And again, I'm in the middle on conservation easements, to be honest with you, but I am enjoying learning more about it. I'm not opposed. I'm not supportive at this point. I need to know more about it. And like I mentioned, so many of our producers want to know more. In expanding upon our conversation there of utilizing these to keep this rangeland in agriculture, to keep it from being developed, help producers stay profitable. I guess the question that I ask is why do producers go to your organization? Well, obviously it's producer founded. You both pointed that out earlier, but there are different entities out there that could provide these too. How do you work to make sure that you're going to be representing the best interest of the land and the producer as well when you're talking with these individuals? Because maybe they're not full-time producers. Sure. Maybe they're leasing that land and to a producer too. Right. And I guess that there's other programs out there, and I don't want you to talk bad. I'm not asking you to talk bad about other programs out there, but how do you get people to come to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think great question, right? And we look at Texas. I mean, we have over 30, organizations that hold conservation easements like we do. But we're the only ag-focused, producer-led organization. And I always tell when producers come in, and start visiting with us, and is the most important, if a conservation easement, you kind of think, hey, this may be something for us. The most important decision is finding that easement holder that is aligned with you, right? Because you're having it, like as Michael mentioned earlier, you're making a decision and working from generations to come. And so you want to make sure you're aligned. And I always say, if Texas Ag Land Trust is not the right entity, that's okay. I would rather us help you find another, partner in conservation easements and help move you that way. I mean, we're focused, right? Is these things of agriculture, keeping those working lands working, and moving that needle.
We don't approach landowners. We do not. The last thing a rancher wants is somebody driving up the lane going, "I got a deal for you," and it's and goodbye. So we don't do that. But the short answer to your question is, how do we let them know? We do things like this podcast, and telling our stories and making sure that ranchers know, landowners know that we're out there. We let them come to us. They ask us to the dance, then we start dancing. And you can almost look at it as at that point, then we get married, and the wedding ceremony is the day the easement closes. But it doesn't end there; it continues on, and that's why that's important to select that organization that understands, as Chad said, your values. Yeah. And without that, there's other organizations, and they have different goals. Our goal is to keep that rancher on the land. Other organizations have different goals, and so if it's a better fit to go somewhere else, then do that. The landowner needs to do what's best for him or her.
I think one of the other pieces too, Michael, is and also to understand, I think comes to the value component is, we don't get to close the conservation easement and we're sort of done, right? And we come see you once a year, and we're always constantly trying to find, what else does that family need? We're trying to find other unique money streams to come to those landowners. That was one thing that really hit me, and Michael and I kind of started, running our organizations at the same time. And, at that point, we were 12 plus years old that Talt was, and a number of those easements were starting to hand over that we've had, for a number of years. We're starting to hand over to that next generation. And that was like an eye opener to me. Lane was like, these families have taken a bite of this conservation apple. There's one less bite of that apple. And just because we have an easement, it's still a business at the end of the day. And how are we still going to keep all this going and viable? And so that was something for me to start thinking about, what is this additive conservation? What can we keep stacking and providing? And so, we're looking at, ecosystem service markets, carbon markets, water markets, biodiversity, anything and everything in the tool to help kind of layer and keep adding on to that conservation easement. And I think that's another thing that, the folks we work with, and just like Michael, we don't go out, they come to us, but that's another thing that draws them, is that they know we're fighting for them each and every day.
Where does the funding come from?
There's not a whole, right? I mean, every state's different and have different opportunities. Texas is a tough one. We have $2 million biannually in a state fund, and it's competitive, and right. And we think about prices of land. $2 million doesn't get us anywhere. So that's a challenge for us, really one major opportunity, is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, their easement program. What I do like about that program is that the money kind of comes through our organizations and right to the landowner, and we hold the conservation easement, so it's not the government holding that easement, and working toward, on top of that. So that gives I think, more assurances to our landowners. And then we look at philanthropic dollars for us. I know, Michael, you have some more opportunities.
We do, but I want to echo a point that Chad just made. Is it's not, even though the easement may be partially or wholly funded by a government grant, the government's not involved in that.
Okay.
We are that organization that is the partner. It's not the government, and I think that's a key point for a lot of landowners. And think, I don't want to get in bed with the government. You're not. That's what we're here for. But our funding sources in California, we're a little more fortunate. We do have some state funding partners as well. We also rely on the Farm Bill through NRCS for their easement program. But California doesn't get. Texas seems to be getting more money from NRCS than we do, and I give them a hard time all the time.
Bureaucrat here.
It's bigger in Texas, but
That's
California,
right?
it's very competitive. But we also have some good funding sources on the state side, and at least we do right now. We're also facing a pretty good budget deficit, so we're starting to see some pressures put on those state funds that are key matches for us. But we also rely on private side monies as well, and that's been a bigger part of our development side and the Rangeland Trust. Is we've ramped up our fund development program because there's a lot of public or private money that we've been able to successfully access.
Oh, sorry,
No, go ahead.
So I guess a lot of people are always curious about what the easement is going to be for. What are the and I don't know if I should call them restrictions, but what are some of the goals of that conservation easement? What are some of the most common? I know you can maybe take them several ways, but what are some of the most common? Because obviously some people want to keep 20, 30 acres out for a home site, or if they need to put some corrals in. How does that get crafted, and how restrictive can they be in perpetuity, depending on how you do that?
Yeah, so we try to keep them as flexible as possible, right? And maybe back up a little, and Michael, please jump in. But some of it is on the funding side. So it's like every dollar that comes, they kind of have their needs or wants, right? And so it could be add some layers of restrictions. And kind of one of my things is not all money's good money, and you really got to think through it. And that's we kind of push right on those landowners to make sure that they're thinking through it and it's the right thing. But for us, really, the way we craft, is really what I'm going to call more of a wide open space type of a easement. So it's really just about, housing developments and development as a whole. We want to keep it at that working land. So we don't. That's about as restrictive as we get, really, Lane, on how we draft and put that together. And you kind of asked the question of like, hey, I want to have a future building envelope, right, of building a home or a cabin or another barn and things like that. And so we really work with the landowner of saying, how many do you want to put in, and again, all of them look different. What we try to do is build flexibility. Say if they can build 3 new structures in the future, we may say, hey, let's pick 6 or 8 sites. And kind of give them some flexibilities that way.
Yeah, we do the same. Typically, corrals, barns, those types of structures that are pertinent to the operation, there's no requirement, no restriction on those. The landowner gets to pick how many building envelopes and future homes they want, if they want any. The more that is given up, the higher the value of the easement, of course. Yeah, right. But again, they have to be able to plan for their future, what their future needs are. And we too have had funders that have said, well, we want this in this particular case. And the landowner says, I can't do that. And they say, then we'll push back. And if we're not successful, we walk away from that funding source. It's not worth it if that easement isn't working for that landowner, it doesn't work for us either.
I think one other decision that I just want to hit too, Lane, is it's the building envelope's a huge decision for a landowner and kind of thinking through that process. And then the second one is the partitions, right? It's like, I have 2 children, and maybe I want to do one partition where one child gets half the ranch and the other one gets the other half, and so that's the other one. And again, the more partitions, just like building envelopes, kind of changes that value of that appraisal.
And so, obviously, when you're involved with these programs, you don't have to put the whole ranch in either.
Exactly.
So, what are some suggestions you have when working with landowners out there? Like, what, this creek bottom or this riparian area would really work well, and you could still, winter your cows down there, or this area looks like that'd be a perfect place for a bunch of summer homes to be built and whatnot. What are those conversations like when you're working with clients and weighing where may be the best use for these easements? Because some people may only want a little chunk of that of their land to be in there, but maybe that might have a higher return than maybe rangeland way in the back North 40.
That's exactly right. We have an easement that it's one ranch in the San Francisco Bay Area. It has 3 different easements on that ranch. The entire ranch is not under easement, but those 3 separate easement areas, those were all mitigation easements. One for a golf course that went in, and another for, I think, a housing development. But the very first easement on this was 32 acres around a pond, and it was habitat for the California tiger salamander. And that easement saved that ranch. That landowner was facing a death tax bill that was horrendous. And the only way that they could survive and keep that ranch in place was to do that easement. And he will tell you fondly that California tiger salamander is the most lucrative livestock he's ever raised. But that easement kept the ranch in place. And then he's done 2 other ones on that. So no, you don't have to do the entire ranch. It's what works for you.
Yeah, I would say not as often we don't do, fence line to fence line, right? I mean, there's areas that we carve out and we talk, and again, it's a thinking process and us sitting down and kind of asking questions for the landowners to kind of think through what's best for them, right? There may be, like you mentioned, an area kind of by a highway that may be a future site and economic return, and they're okay with that, and, we carve that out. We don't do that. A lot of times we'll carve out headquarters and things of that, so it just gives them a little bit more freedom to build what they want to build and not worry about things and things like that. So
some may say that you're handcuffing that next generation 1 or 2, 3 down the road for unforeseen, issues or anything like that. But is there instances where say the creek changes course in a flood and you got to move your operation, the home base or whatever? Could you buy out a few acres out of that conservation easement or anything like that to reverse that, or is it set like that? That's a question I'm curious about.
Go ahead.
It's difficult to remove land from an easement.
Okay.
That's a very difficult process. However, there's usually an opportunity to make the right decisions on how that land is stored. So if you do have a situation like that, it's an act of God that has changed something, and as long as the net change to the conservation values is 0 or better, then that's a change that we can usually make. So we try to look at it from that standpoint. For us, the top conservation value in our easements, and I'm sure they are in Taltz as well, is the grazing. And that's the number 1 conservation value. It's not the open space. It's the grazing value.
So you touched on it earlier about the 2 of the benefits, either the cash aspect or the tax aspect of things. Obviously, if it's a young person, maybe they're starting off on their own to make a go of it in the countryside. Their first gen, or maybe the home place isn't big enough. Obviously, if they try to buy some land and put some of that land in a conservation easement, what are some examples of how some of those young producers, or it doesn't even have to be young, people just buying land and trying to utilize that easement to help make some payments or take that tax burden off? Can you share maybe 1 or 2 different examples of where the cash was the better option, or the tax break in the long run was going to be better than getting cash up front? Because again, that's something I'm curious about.
Yeah, they're all different, and every situation's different.
I don't know. I want to spend on until
yeah. And that's I'm trying to think of a couple of scenarios or opportunities. I mean, I think we're working with a young couple right now, Lane, that we're able to get some purchase dollars through NRCS. This easement's going to keep them in business. I mean, they're just barely staying on in a grazing component now, and they've been having to go down that route of selling 10 acres, getting that, and kind of paying off a sibling, and they can't sell anymore. There's not going to be enough there for them to operate. So that's, an example, with that. We've seen some other structures of family aspects of putting an easement, kind of lowering some of those basis, and from a good estate planning and CPA being able to kind of transfer or kind of sell back to someone else in the family that can't afford it and kind of make the cash, kind of make it work.
And we've had situations where, one in particular, where a rancher leased a piece of property for a long, long time. The owner of that sold it to a developer. Developer put a subdivision map in place, went under. And then the bank took the property, and the rancher called and said, this is an integral part of my operation. I want to buy this. What are the odds of getting a conservation easement, and what's it going to look like? And typically a conservation easement's a rough rule of thumb is about 30% of the fee value, and it could be higher than that. It can be lower, and it can be well up into 60-70% in some cases. So but a good 30 to 40% discount rate is probably a good rule of thumb. And this particular landowner took the bet, bought the ranch, and had the ability to just eke it out until that easement came through, and that easement value and what he was paid for that was able to pay down that debt to where it was reasonable.
Well, again, I'm curious. I know our audience is curious. Yeah. And we are just going to take a quick pause, hear another message, but we're going to continue our conversation here today with both of you. So we'll be back right after this.
If you're involved in transporting cattle, now is the time to get your Beef Quality Assurance Transportation Certification. This is a proven way to learn and adopt the best practices in animal care and transport, from the ranch to the feed yard to the processing facility. And it's important for everyone in every part of the beef cattle industry to do things right to show consumers we all care about beef quality. There are new BQA transportation training modules available online now. And best of all, it's free to become BQA Transportation Certified. It's the right thing to do for your business and for our beef industry. To find out more and to get your BQA Transportation Certification, visit the website bqa.org. The Beef Quality Assurance Program is funded by the Beef Checkoff.
As we come back today with Michael Delbar and Chad Ellis, we're talking about conservation easements. And we're getting into depth with them, obviously, and hopefully I'm not throwing too many curveballs at you here today. But I guess a question that I have: what are some of the most common reasons why an owner may decide not to put their land in a conservation easement when you're talking with them? Because obviously, you probably do have conversations where you maybe advise them, this might not be the best option.
Absolutely, we do. We have lots of conversations of like, look, this isn't the right, and kind of go through that and understand. I think some of it is, it's costly. That's the thing, right? Is that we think about it, Lane, as it is a real estate transaction, right? And we have title policies. We have just like anything of buying your home or another property. We have a lot of families, again, like I mentioned, land rich, cash poor, and they want to do an easement. It's the thing they want, but we just can't afford, to make it happen.
Sometimes that easement value is not very high. The development pressures aren't there. It may be in a more remote area, so the pressures don't warrant a high appraisal. So by the time the costs aren't going to change necessarily. It's still going to take as much time and effort, but so sometimes it just doesn't pencil. Or if they're in an area that they're doing some other activities that they don't want to stop doing that makes sense for them to do, and it's not for everybody. So if it doesn't fit, don't worry about it. Do what's best for your operation.
And I think one of the keys is it's timing, right? I mean, that's another thing as well. Is sometimes it's just not the right time, and maybe it's to wait for some of the prices to swing and development and some of those. And so it's just, it's being patient and kind of talking through that.
So what are some other suggestions you have for folks to preserve that land if they don't feel that the easement is the path to go at that time?
So one thing that we're trying to do for the same, I think reason, Lane, is we're trying to find creative ways. I kind of mentioned the carbon markets and other things. We're trying to look at, what I'm gonna call more of a short-term agreement, right? Of, how can we maybe, keep that ranch together, and it's kind of like a 10-year agreement or a 15-year agreement, and that's kind of starts that stepping stone and helps keep it. It's not going to be as lucrative, but those are things that we're trying to look at, new tools.
And California has what we call the Williamson Act, which is an agreement. It's a rolling 10-year agreement or 20 years, depending on the situation, that provides a substantial property tax break. Unfortunately, that's due to California being California. There's some challenges with that program in the last number of years, but it's still there, and it's a extremely popular and very effective conservation tool. But as Chad was saying, it's what else can we as our conservation organizations do to provide those landowners more income or more opportunity to wait out to when the right time to do an easement may come. We commissioned UC Berkeley to do a study on 306,000 acres of our portfolio, and then what they did was they monetized that value of what we call the ecosystem services, that open space, the food and fiber production, the groundwater recharge, the clean air, clean water, and in that just 306,000 acres, they determined that the annual benefit to Californians was $1.44 billion. That's a heck of a lot of money. So how do we, if that value there, how do we capture part of that at least and return that to the landowner who's doing the right thing to the benefit of everyone, but not getting paid to do it?
So what are some of the key facts or, when we're looking at this, things that they should consider when looking at this easement? When you're sitting down, maybe you've gone through a ranch visit, you've identified what are some of the main things that folks need to consider before they sign on the dotted line?
Well, first, I would find your fellow producer that's done it recently, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And some of that. And that's one of the things that we try to do too is, it's not in a vacuum, and then, kind of talking to those other families and kind of understanding of, what worked for them, and hearing from another family of hey, here's our situation, this is what we're thinking. And you start seeing those light bulb moments of them of, kind of thinking through lane of other things to add or what they want to do, and kind of coming around to that.
We really, in addition to, as Chad talked about, talking to other landowners, but talk to your family.
Yeah.
And it's oftentimes we see decisions made in a vacuum inside the family, and that's not good. Everybody should be on the same page, or at least understand what's happening and have their input to it. So talk to the kids, talk to the grandkids if that's the situation, but make sure that the family, all of those involved in the operation, understand what's happening and are on the same page.
Yeah, I want to kind of share a story, Lane, I think, and we were working with a family. This was probably about 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And we went to the ranch, and we're talking to the, husband, wife, and they had just turned, probably 70 years old, right? And I've noticed over the last couple of years is that's like a big flip of a switch of, man, I'm not I'm not the spring chicken in my 60s anymore, and I really need to think about, what's the next steps. And we sat around the table and actually stayed the night at the ranch and just had a great time of just talking. We woke up the next morning, and I said, well, how'd you sleep? How was that? And he goes, this is the first night's sleep I've had, solid sleep, in 35 years. He's like, I didn't realize the weight. We've made this decision. My wife and I have put our blood, sweat, and tears of putting this ranch together. And I know that if some reason my kids don't want the ranch, I'm okay with that. because they may sell the ranch in the future, but whoever buys this ranch is going to love the ranch just as much as we do. And just seeing that and being part of that was like, it was just amazing, a really amazing moment in my life to see really what that means in the tool and helping empower a family is pretty amazing.
Well, do all states have similar land trusts? And if there's a state where one of our listeners, and we don't got to get specific, but if they don't, how can they maybe get in touch to an entity similar if their state doesn't have a land trust like your respective organizations?
So I kind of mentioned earlier the partnership of Rangeland Trust, again, and so we have, 9 land trusts that these same principles that Michael and I have been talking about. So we have Texas, Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, Colorado, Montana, California, and then we have land trust kind of Washington, Oregon, and
Wyoming,
and Wyoming. So, and then there's a couple of us that kind of work in multiple states. I mean, one of the things with my background of being at Noble and lots of ranching friends in Oklahoma, we opened an office in Oklahoma so we could help provide services back to the ranchers in Oklahoma across the Red River. And again, our key partner being Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers, right there, it's in their same region. And we're working with Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association to trying to, help support them. And if they decide as an organization to open up, have their own land trust, then, we want to help them. Cause I mean, that's what we're here for. Unfortunately in Oklahoma, the options are very limited. It's the Nature Conservancy, which may not really be the right fit for many of our fellow producers. And that's why, I wanted to be able to kind of open an office there, and we have some others that kind of do the same. So,
South Dakota is a perfect example. They didn't have an organization, and the port organization, the 8 of us at the time, helped out and worked with folks in the producers in South Dakota to get the South Dakota Ag Land Trust started. And they're starting to get more NRCS money than us too. And I was like, what the heck? You guys are brand new. But they're really, it's taking off. So if there's a producers in states that aren't already covered by an organization like ours, reach out to us and we can help try to get something started if that interest is there.
Well, I've enjoyed our conversation today. I've learned a lot. I'm still in the middle on it, though. There's a lot of research that I need to do, and I think that's a feeling that many of our audience needs to do, and that's why I enjoy hosting this podcast, because I'm okay to be vulnerable in that. But we got a busy day here at CattleCon. What are just some last words of wisdom that you'd just like to share with our friends here today?
I think what you just said, I think is the most important thing that we've probably talked about all today. Is take your time, gather information.
Do your research.
Do your research, right? And that's the key. And again, it's finding the right tools. And I mean, not just conservation easement, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's buying a new head gate, whatever it is, right? You want to do your homework and know that, this is the right thing. It's an investment. And is it the right investment for our operation and, more importantly, our family?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, thank you both for joining us here today, and I'll let you go get a beer here because it's about the end of the day here at the CattleCon.
I appreciate it, Lane.
Thank you for the opportunity to share this with the listeners.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here today, and for our friends for sticking along and hopefully learning and more about these conservation easements. And we're going to continue to, of course, have more of these conversations right here on the Cattleman's Call podcast. I'm Lane Nordland. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to NCBA's Cattleman's Call podcast with Lane Nordland. For more information, visit ncba.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast today.